own something. You don't have to be just okay at 10 things. I'd rather you own 2 things really well. And then, in another 6 months, let's try to own 1 more thing. Now you own 3 things. And now you become known for something and you can impact somebody's life in that area.
Hey, fitness fans, welcome back to the Future of Fitness podcast and interview series. This is your host, Eric Malzone, and this is episode number 115. I talked to Lee Taft. So Lee is most notably known for his expertise in speed, agility, and quickness. And, when I was prepping for this interview, I was talking to a couple of people who were mentioned in this interview as well, because they gave me some questions to ask Lee. And, everyone's like, man, Lee, what a great guy. He's just a really nice guy, just a good guy, right? I kept hearing that over and over again. And, honestly, truth be told, after interviewing him, he's a great guy. He's an awesome dude. And I really enjoyed talking to him. And I wish I could talk to him all the time, but he's probably busy. So yeah, all the things we talked about in here, obviously his expertise, but his story, right? How he started from almost nothing and built his way up to, the expertise that he has achieved now, the notoriety that he has now. It took time and perseverance and consistency and all of those big buzzwords that mean success. And I think it's great. It's great for people to hear. And it's really cool of him to come on and share all of that knowledge. So before we get on to the interview, I want to read a review from DMT Cal. He or she says, Eric's insightful commentary into the framework of the new generation fitness industry is a must listen. He knows his stuff and pulls in expert partners to complement his message. So thank you, man or woman. I really appreciate that. Great knowledge. And if you want to have your review read on air, just go to iTunes, give us a subscribe and leave us a nice review. And I will certainly get to it during one of the intros of our shows. And another thing to do is you might want to check out our YouTube channel. If you don't check it out right now, we just kind of revamped it. We did. We revamped it. And it's a great place to listen for free. If you want to listen to it, you can, of course, watch the interviews. There's a lot of nuance that happens watching us converse face-to-face, or not face-to-face, but over video, that maybe you don't get in an audio format. So it's out there. Go over there and subscribe to us. That'd be great. It is the Fitness Marketing Alliance page, actually, and it's under the Future of Fitness. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 115 with Lee Taft. Enjoy the ride. All right, and we're live. Lee Taft, welcome, man.
Hey, Eric. It's so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've been referred to you by several people within my network. And, today is going to be kind of fun because I pulled some people in our Fitness Accelerator community, our online Slack community of, hey, I got Lee coming on in about an hour. And, what questions would you have? And they're like, it came out in awesome. 5 minutes. And so they're excited for the interview. So we already know we'll have at least 5 people listening. 6 if we count my mom. So.
There you go.
Lee, do me a favor, for people maybe who don't know who you are, I know you've been in the industry for 30 some odd years. Just give us your story. Give us a little bit of your background and kind of where you are today.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me share that. I started as a phys ed teacher. I grew up in a family. I'm the youngest of 6, and really, really big age disparity. And, my parents have both passed many years ago. They were much, much older, but my dad was actually he was a phys ed teacher, but in World War II, his responsibility was to train. He was in Jacksonville, and before he was, basically shipped over to Europe, they found out he was in fitness and physical education. So this, obviously was in the 40s. And so I kind of gained that perspective, that background. He used to teach me and tell me the things he used to do with the men and women, at that time in Jacksonville. So that was kind of my perspective. And then I grew up in a family of phys ed and family of teachers. My brothers are phys ed and they're all retired now. And eventually they were ADs, and one of them went into administration like my dad eventually did. And so that was kind of my background. And then I graduated with a phys ed degree, immediately went right into teaching phys ed, but I was also I was also a coach of football, basketball, track, and then eventually became the head coach of those sports. But I quickly realized what I wanted to do was more related to, the fitness field. I was kind of like the de facto strength coach back in 1989, at the high school I was at. I was being asked to train athletes back then. Parents would say, "Hey, Lee, would you work with my kid a little bit?" And, it was kind of new to me to do it that way.
Sure.
So from there, I kind of just followed it. I went back. I left teaching after 2 years to go full-time into my master's. I went to the United States Sports Academy in Alabama, and from there got a strength and conditioning mentorship at Bollettieri's Tennis Academy, which is now, people would know it now as IMG. But when I was there, it was just, Bollettieri's. It was all tennis. So I was a speed and strength coach for that. And then I kind of chased the business. You know how it is. Fitness, sometimes you chase it. It just wherever. I went to University of Kentucky, worked there a little bit. I went back down to another tennis academy at Palmer. And then I went kind of home to New York and opened up a business there back in the early 90s. I had one of the first, speed academies, I guess you could call it, back then. And, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I just but over time, I've become more of a consultant. Just as more people tend to want to, ask you questions. And so it leads into consulting. And that's what I've been doing a lot of now.
Yeah. Awesome. It's, so you have almost a pedigree from this, from your whole family all the way through. That's always really interesting. So it's just been it's just your world.
Right? It is. Yeah. It is. And it's, I've been, I still remember this. It's funny because I have a daughter, or I have 3 kids, but I have a daughter that's a junior in college down in Florida. And then I have a senior daughter. And then I have a 10-year-old son. It's funny. And he'll be 11 actually here in a few days. But I was telling him the other day, my dad used to set up in our garage. He'd write it out, and then he'd write in red and black, and he'd write out this little weight workout. And I was like my son's age. And we had these old benches. Remember those benches that were, you could barely fit your spine on it, let alone your whole back. And then the bars to hold the bench wasn't much wider than your shoulders. Yeah. So if you didn't put it on, that thing was tipping. Well, he used to write out my things that I had to do and my whole routine, and I'd go out and do them and pull-ups and push-ups and then some bar stuff. And, so I just fell in love with it back then because they did it. My brothers and my sisters were athletes as well and active, and my mom. So it was fun. It was a good time.
I remember, I first started, I think I did my first set of bench press sometime in the 80s. And it was like this kit that my friend had in his garage that he had gotten from, I don't know, was it Kmart? These things came out?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was a trip. And I was like, I did one set and I was like, do I look different? Do I look different yet? Right.
Yeah. You get balance training in with those old benches there, because you're falling off it if you don't have
it's core stability, right? Yeah. That's really funny. So, I'm curious when you mention different terms, right? Physical education, fitness, sports performance, when you look at fitness and physical education, is there a distinct difference to you in those two terms, or is it kind of molded into one nowadays?
I'll tell you that's an awesome question, because I have written many articles and many blog posts and many, just even Facebook little posts and stuff on that very topic. When I grew up, because of the impact of my father, he was very influential in fitness and physical education. Our physical education when I grew up was very fitness-based, very gymnastics, very more athletic demand. Right. Versus what happened, and there's a story behind it, but what happened was it eventually got switched over to more of, a curriculum like the classroom, where we're going to teach a unit of soccer and a unit of this and a unit of that. Well, we lost the fitness component to it, but I still refer it to as physical education. Physically, but right now what it is, it's actually more sport education if you were to take it from its true definition, because we educate more on the different aspects of sport. And that is not wrong. It's just different. If we're going to actually call it physical education, well, then we need to get back to its roots of being physically educated. And we can do that hand in hand while teaching some sport activities and game activities, things of that nature. But the true essence of physical education, as it was originally designed, and back when every time there was a war, Eric, then physical education became a higher priority.
Yeah.
From the president, because they saw that we needed to be a strong country. We needed strong people. We need to be physically fit, especially when the Russians were very strong and the Germans, especially with their old Turnverein system, was very strong. So I look at physical education a little bit differently, I think, than a lot of people do. And I think there's a lot of people today that are not real fond of physical education just because of the program they went through. And I think if it was organized differently, I think they would have more of a lifelong appreciation of what physical education could have done for them. So I look at it a little bit different than like even sports performance and things of that nature.
Okay, so I remember I actually sat through a presentation by Mark Rifkin at I think it was a Strength Matters Summit, and he went through kind of the history of fitness, physical education, and it was fascinating. I feel like it should be basic education for fitness professionals nowadays, but the Kennedy era. Do you remember there was a government backed or do you remember? You know what I'm talking about? It was
absolutely. That's where the president
initiative.
Yeah, that's where a lot of those tests come from.
Yeah. So educate people on that, because I think there's a lot of people out there listening right now who have no idea it existed. And the reason I want to bring it up, because I found I looked at if you go Google what we're talking about, you'll see videos and images of people, not videos, probably just images of people doing these, very demanding courses, and it was almost like I think there was like a graduation through it. Right. You had to get to certain levels. And I looked at, all of these movements they were doing. And then I looked at quote unquote box gyms that have evolved, kind of through CrossFit, but functional training. And I'm like, oh, we're actually in some ways coming back full circle, which is cool. Right. So tell us about that background so people can be educated.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would happen, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is the presidents, every time there was a war, had this, they would see a lack of strength as a population, and that's not a good thing. When you're entering into a potentially lengthy war, and you need, healthy bodies to be strong. And so physical education became more about meeting standards. It's much like entering into the military. You have to go these standards, which unfortunately they keep dropping them. And, they're not making people work their way up to it. They're bringing them down so that they don't, so that they can get people in. Otherwise, people wouldn't make it in. So they devised this, these training programs that helped. And what's the name of the school out in California? It's I want to say DeSera, or you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that was through Kennedy and the pushing of, and like Germany. And Germany they wanted their people to be strong, so they developed these huge facilities. And in them, they had, the swinging rings and the high bars and all the bucks and all these different apparatus. Well, people were getting very strong. Well, what happened back then, the government actually got fearful because they were afraid of potential overthrow because they were getting really strong. So the government banned them. Well, what happened is they moved west. There were some in Pennsylvania and different places. And my dad used to tell me about them. And there were really big facilities. Well, what happened over time was, entrepreneurs saw these great big indoor buildings and said, man, what if we had a soccer field or a basketball court or something of that nature inside it? And that's when those physical fitness factories basically kind of fell apart. And then they became what we know now as racket clubs and basketball facilities and soccer domes, and all that stuff. But that's what they were. They were Turnverein facilities. And there's still some around. Matter of fact, I think there's one in Indiana still, but it was kind of part of a barracks, army barracks. But it's now used for other stuff. But that's what it was originally. It's really big facilities. And that was the push back then. And again, everything changes, and that's one of the things. But like you said, I think it's going to come around to a degree. I don't know if it'll go to that level, but I think to a degree it's coming back around.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it's this podcast is called The Future of Fitness, right? But we learn so much if we look back. And we can see, the trends and the cycles, everything's cyclical. And, when Nautilus came out with their solutions, quote unquote solutions, getting everyone on the machines. And now we're starting to see that maybe that wasn't the best path for general population. And the functional aspect and all that is coming back. It's really interesting. If like if people are go search the old school gyms that we're talking about, and then like pull up a modern like CrossFit or functional fitness facility, and they're going to look really similar, even like, Ninja Warrior or, Spartan, like this is all, it's all coming back full circle to, this functional education of fitness. And it's really cool. So, Lee, I have my first question from the crowd, right? The virtual crowd. So, Malcolm Brody, he's out of Tel Aviv. He is a specialist in strength and conditioning for cycling. He says, how have athletes progressed due to the internet? Like in the example he's talking about is like knowledge ahead of time or misknowledge. Like how are athletes progressing with this wealth of information?
Well, obviously the positive of it is when you need a solution, it's easier to find that solution quickly. You can tap into many of the top professionals, or you can see them via YouTube video of them training someone or speaking directly to you. You can research their articles. You can get that. So from that standpoint, the internet has provided the opportunity for athletes to understand not just the exercise selection, execution, but also the designing of it and the programming of it. Because when I was a kid, it was pretty much you tried it. A few weeks later, if you could still walk, well, then it worked. If you couldn't walk, your back hurt and your shoulder was out of joint, it didn't work. So you tried it again. Now we know better. We can actually, have people show us and guide us. So that's the good thing. But kind of jokingly, I said, how we used to do it, but there's still that aspect of, I think exploration is what makes training really special. I think because everybody's a little bit different, not, physiologically, okay, we all have a heart, we all have lungs, we all have blood flow, and we all have heart rates, and they may be different and all, but we're fairly similar. But mentality has so much to do with how we gain result from training. And also, I think there's still that, there's that area that I still think has a place where you experiment. Okay. And you once you have a general idea, we certainly don't want to do things that aren't safe, but I still think there's that value in going in a gym and just try things. Just go through things, make sure you're safe, make sure you're doing them correctly, but just try a program on your own, one that you've come up with, and see how it occurs. So I think there's value in both, but definitely the internet has brought us to where we are now. And that's why we're going so fast. And we forget how young our profession is. There's professions out there that are, thousands of years old, and we're at the level we're at, maybe 50 years old, 60 years in terms of the depth that we have, we dabbled before that. But so I think it's done a great job for us.
When do you think, because we talked about this before recording, so when I believe that the fitness industry kind of started, but is there a specific marker when you think, okay, this is when it kind of officially started? Is there anything you refer to?
Yeah, I would say, because I know guys like Boyd Epley, who he started like the accreditation of a profession. Okay, he was him and there's several of the guys there, Pat Etcheberry and Bruno Pauletta, and these guys were kind of the starters of the NSCA. So from a logistical certification, this is it. That was that time. But when I grew up, it was still looking at muscle and fitness and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then prior to him, the Weider and, we talked about him earlier. I'm drawing a blank.
Lane.
Yeah, Jack LaLanne. I mean, I still remember watching his shows when I was a little kid, and he had the jumper on and his outfit, and he would be sitting in a chair. It was like a high chair, director's chair, and he's showing him how he can do leg, an L sit and dip while he's in the chair. And, he was kind of the one that made it a little bit more popular. And then, but it was niche. It was that certain people.
Yeah.
But then it went on to the bodybuilding, and then we got, kind of a hold of this powerlifting and Olympic, and then it kind of took off into, more of what we know now. But I would say, the later 70s is when we started to kind of grasp it a little bit more, as to this could be something as a profession that I could actually go to school for,
Yeah. 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 It's really interesting. And, I remember seeing Jack LaLanne on TV because I grew up in the Bay Area, and he was on the local network. He had these 15-minute segments, and I was very young when this started to happen, but I remember hearing about like these crazy things he was doing, like pulling a boat across the bay, handcuffed and his feet bound, and swimming, this boat across the bay. And it was so cool what he did. And, my first coaching was at his grandnephew's spot in San Francisco, Chris LaLanne at LaLanne Fitness. So I had the pleasure of meeting him, and that was obviously a very inspiring moment for me. You mentioned too, that I guess we can talk about the tinkerers within the industry. People where you're talking about like you try something, well, my shoulder is messed up, so I'll try again, right? I think there's still a high level of tinkering, and those are the people who are kind of evolving into the next thing. I mean, I had a recent interview with a guy, Ryan Whitehead, out of Flagstaff, who's doing some really interesting thing of merging therapy and training. And I think a lot of the tinkering, and I'm curious to get your thought, it seems to be happening on the technological front too, with the things, because we have so many, I guess, diagnostics, for lack of a better term, that we can get, the HRV, the velocity training, and I'm curious, what technology in the speed and agility world that you're using for your practice, or if any. I'm sure you get approached all the time by tech.
Sure. Yeah. Well, really what I do now, I like when I was at Ball State for a little while ago, so I had access to some of, Tendo units and things of that nature. But what I do right now, I don't have a lot of fancy things. I have a jump mat. Okay. A basic jump mat, they're $500 or $400 something mat. Now, how I use that is when if I test, let me just give you an example. I have a girl she's a basketball player, and her vertical jump might be 21 inches or something like that. Okay. So when they come back in, and I know on a particular day that I'm going to give them some pretty good power work, or some, they have to give me some pretty good energy return, I will have them perform 5 independent vertical jumps. And if her numbers, let's say she averaged out at like 16.8 on all 5. Well, that's telling me she's not ready today. Today's not a good day to go out, because her nervous system is telling me it's not with us. So I'll change what I'm going to do, and we'll still get some good training in, but I won't go after the result that I wanted because she can't give it to me today. She just isn't capable. So I'll use something that's pretty simple, but using it in kind of a high-tech way, where I'm able to kind of look at her, what, it may be telling me what her sleep quality was, what type of stress she was under. Maybe she came off an exam week or something. Mm-hmm. And, so I use it for that. And that gives me really good feedback right there. And then the rest of it becomes just because of my setting that I'm in right now. I actually train out of my house now because I travel so much. I close my place down. I use my eyes really well. Like if I see an athlete that typically can hit these postures and positions and they're just not hitting them, that's my time. And or even if they're hitting them, but they're hitting them really slow, if I want speed, then that's kind of my signal where I'll back off. So I kind of mix the technology with, 30 years plus watching a lot of good people, train people. I've developed some pretty good eyes, and I'm able to see things really well. But but I think the technology is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And I had a while ago, about a year ago, I had Coach Bob Takano on this show too. And he's, in the Olympic weightlifting world,
Yep.
national coach for many years. And I had the pleasure of working with him because we were close geographically. And, he said, there's no substitute for the coach's eye. And it takes tens of thousands, if not millions of reps to get that eye. And there's just no, there's no metric out there. There's no diagnostic that's ever going to change that. Speaking of technology, so a colleague of mine, Chris Chapman, he's the head of sports science at Push. Yep. So they do velocity training. So I was chatting with him this morning too, and I asked him if he had any specific questions for you. And he had some good ones. And this is just a great general question, especially for the people listening. But if there's are there any for people, and this is in the context of people just getting in the game, right? Are there any lessons you would teach your younger self just getting into the field?
In just general, into the field. Yeah, definitely. I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten really good at networking and networking the correct way. In other words, not just reaching out and saying hi and then not following up again. You know what I mean? Now I understand the relationship building is probably a better word. When I was younger, I was never afraid to go up to people or to talk to people, but I didn't know how to cultivate a relationship that well. I just thought, well, if I say hi, they're going to know who I am and they're going to want to involve me or hire me or, bring me in. And it just doesn't work that way. You've got to bring something to the table. And I would say probably would have done more. And I tell this to my interns all the time and any assistants I've had is you can't be afraid to work for free early on. You have to be willing to put the time in and be uncomfortable to get where you want to go, because building your network and your relationships and letting people know that you're really in it to make a difference, not just to get ahead for you. You're in it to make a difference. I think that sets us up better. That's probably something I didn't do really well when I was younger. I guess I just didn't know. And now that I realize, well, I didn't know, most likely my interns, they don't get it either. They don't have that mindset yet. So I try to help them with that, making sure you're developing the relationship through sharing and giving. I think that's the big thing that would have helped me a lot more.
Yeah, that is, it's so powerful and it's so true. I was talking with somebody else. I can't remember, their name will come up soon to me, I'm sure. But, relationship building isn't just connecting with someone on social media, which a lot of people think, well, yeah, I have a huge network. I have 20,000 followers on Instagram. Yeah, but they don't really know you, are they going to take your call? One of the reasons that was unexpected, a benefit of having a podcast, and I've helped coach people into starting podcasts, is that, it's an amazing way to offer value right up front. Like, I want to interview you. I want you to, I want to introduce you to my audience, and I want to highlight you and share your knowledge, and then it's a great way at least to start. So when I talk, you can have an almost a strategic approach to building relationships, but you have to be willing, and what you're saying is the same thing, is you have to be willing to offer value up front with no expectations in return.
That's right.
And that's a hard thing to understand, especially if you don't know how you're going to pay rent, which is.
Yeah. That's right. I'll tell you one of the things, Eric, that I think taught me the hardest transition I had was because I came from a phys ed background and a school coaching background. Mm-hmm. You don't learn like the business, especially when I grew up. You don't understand the business of performance. So when my second year, I was a head basketball coach. I was assistant head football, and I was a head track coach. Combined, I didn't make $1,000. Okay. So, and people look at me, you're crazy. I said, yeah, but I didn't know any different, because that's what my dad coached for 20 years, 3, sometimes 4 sports. Plus he was the AD. He didn't get paid. That was part of the job if you were phys ed. Yeah. So that was all I knew. So now I jump into the business world and I'm like, hey, yeah, sure, come on in, don't worry about it. That's right. And then all of a sudden the bills start showing up. I'm like, okay, that strategy is not going to work very well. So, but it's still in my heart, 30 years later, I want to help. I want to do things and I want to be a part. And I think that's what's allowed me to build my a reputation of someone that will give. I will give information on training, on this. If you call me, and I get people that call me that are interns just coming out of college or it's juniors in college. If they call me, I pick up and I call back. I don't, that's just the way I've always been. And that's the way I feel. Yeah, and I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but that's just the way I've always been. And that's my way of connecting. And I try to tell young guys, look, you got to be you, but at some point you're going to have to learn to be uncomfortable living without the best, Jordans and the best, shirt, sweatsuit and this. You're going to have to just be able to, put a couple of years in when you're living. I always tell this story. I slept in the summer one time, went back to college, didn't have a place. I slept on a park bench. Like that's, I had to sleep, and that's where I slept. So it was that's part of it. You just do what you have to do sometimes.
Yeah, it's every once in a while I get asked that question, or even people in a group, in a Facebook group or something like that, and they say, well, you have to be willing to kind of eat, shit for a little while and be doing that. Well, they're like, well, that doesn't help me pay the bills. I'm like, well, that's kind of the dilemma that we all have to go through. You have to figure it out. There's no system for that. It's just the struggle. And it's the struggle of, I think fitness industry, fitness professionals are entrepreneurial by nature because we have to be, right? Because you can't get out of college and go into this like $40,000 job and work your way up the ladder. You just have to figure it out. And, because you're known for a specialty now, right? Speed, agility, and quickness. And when did that happen? Like how long into your career did you become known as that person?
Yeah, it happened fairly early. Well, what happened? I mentioned earlier. I went to Bulla Terry's Tennis Academy, and I was a speed coach. Well, I was a strength coach, but I did a lot of on-court speed is what they wanted me to do. So I got asked to go to what was called the Easter Bowl. The Easter Bowl is the largest U.S. junior tennis tournament. Okay, there's one called the Orange Bowl, which is the world. Okay, that's everybody, largest tennis tournament in the world. This one was the Easter Bowl, and it's down in the Doral. Okay, so with the golf, everybody knows the Doral is golf, but there was a big tennis tournament. Well, I went and I did a speed clinic, and I did it for all the athletes, and parents were around, and coaches and all. And it was funny because I walked around with a stack of cones under my arm. I always had about a stack of about 15 to 20 cones because I was ready to break out a clinic. It could be a restaurant. I'm ready. I always had my cones. So I do this clinic, and then my wife and I, and this was in 92, I think, 92 or 93. We're sitting by the pool. I had finished the clinic. We just sat down, got a glass of water. We're sitting there, and a guy walks by. And he sees me and he points and says, "Hey, there's the Cone Man." So the guy, my name for a little while there was the Cone Man because they saw me with the cones. Well, then it was funny because I had written a lot of stuff over speed and all, and then someone coined me the speed guy. And that happened, probably 20 something years ago. And then that it just stuck. And it's funny. I've always been really good at understanding movement, speed. I can identify it quick. I can evaluate it and implement it really, really quick. But to be honest with you, and I love it, and I love doing that, I am very, very comfortable, and I love being in the weight room. Like I love teaching Olympic lifts. I love teaching just regular lifts. I love doing exercises like that. But I also am smart enough to know that my niche was picked for me. I made it work, but it was picked for me because that's what people were bringing me in. So I rode with it, and that's what's given me a career to this point. So yeah, but that's kind of how it started. But I'm glad I wasn't known as the Cone Man, especially when the movie The Coneheads came out. I didn't want to be associated with that.
Yeah, the Cone Man. That's fantastic. So, I have a question from Ben Reuter. He's a fellow podcaster. He has the Moving to Live podcast, and he's from academia. He's also in the world of endurance sports.
Yes.
And so he asks, it's a great question. How young nowadays do you believe is too young for athletes to specialize, or just youth?
Yeah. Really good question. And that's what, how we have these hot topics that come and go.
Yes.
That's been a hot topic for years, and it's
Yes.
going to always remain there because it's that important. Well, a couple things. If let's go from a technical aspect first. If we specialize too soon with young athletes and we teach them very intricate, detailed, technical patterns, what happens is they're going to hit a growth spurt. And they're going to change. They're going to change biomechanically. They're going to change physically. That pattern that they learned when they were younger is still going to want to produce itself, but yet now we have different levers. We have different strengths. We have a nervous system that can, become, much more aggressive and more maybe fast twitch dominant versus it might not have been when they were, pre-adolescent. So when kids are young, if we go too detailed, we can actually screw up their ability to refine skills when they get older. So from that standpoint, we got to be really careful. Now, from the standpoint of the physical aspect of, is it too hard on our bodies? And, if we're doing too much, well, there's just so much research out on that, and just, case studies nonstop, where if kids keep doing the same things over and over and over, and they're very specific and that's all they do, or they specialize in one sport, we just see these gross overall chronic and acute injuries that are coming just from the overuse, and they're not getting enough variability or diversity in their body. So and here's the thing, does sport specific training work? And the answer is yes, but there's the downside of it. So I can make a 10-year-old become very good at a specific movement pattern in a specific sport if I drive that hard enough and long enough, but that's not a good thing if I want longevity. Now, a gymnast, okay, well, they have a short lifespan compared to now we're seeing tennis players playing into their late 30s. They're still competitive. So I think that the variety is really important. So I think sport-specific training, we know it works, but the problem is we're not patient enough to say, well, I want my athlete to be the best when they're 18, 19, 20, 21 versus 11, 12, 13, because my neighbor's kid is really good. So I got to get my kid real good. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing ongoing debate. Right. And I'd be curious because I always, I don't have kids. Hopefully, at one point we will. But I always think of this, what would I have? What would I urge them to do? And I think swimming is one. That's my background. I was a aquatics athlete, because it's just something you want them to have, right?
Yes.
I also think that like martial arts and gymnastics are two things that seem to be universally applicable through just general awareness of the body, proprioception, all of those things. Do you have any thoughts on like if you're starting kids off and given they have the interest in it too, right?
Yes.
That's the big thing. And is there any, I guess, kind of generalist type sports or activities that you would urge people to get their kids into?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, just to piggyback on what you said, I think gymnastics and that background I think is really good. The martial arts background is really good. It's funny because with all my kids, I do boxing with them. So part of their training, and I'm talking about my children, we'll teach them. And with some of my other athletes, I'll do various boxing with them and movements for that. Because I just think there's great value in learning those skills. My son did a program called Ninja Zone, and Ninja Zone is it's kind of it's gymnastics with different types of climbing and fun stuff. And they get the headband, and they get the, as they progress. So that was awesome for him. I also think I love swimming. Swimming is I grew up in a big background of swimming as well. I love it. My dad was a phenomenal swim instructor. And so we all grew up learning. Plus, not not only because I think it's good for them to learn, but that's one sport that can save your life.
Yes.
If you're, so I think every kid needs to at least have the basics of being able to stay above water, when they and have some swimming skill. I think that's a really good one. The other one is I think young kids should be exposed to like soccer. And the reason I say soccer is because most of our sports are geared towards getting our hands in position to make a play. Soccer forces the feet. You move your body to get your feet. That's a different body orientation. And the agility requirements of soccer are so much different than most other sports because of that. Whether they want to be, lifelong soccer players, I just think as a young kid, it's a really good skill to have. So you have the dexterity with the feet. And then certainly I'm a fan of throwing. I think throwing it's a primitive skill. I think they need to learn how to throw. So whether you're a tennis player, which will consider that as part of a throwing action, serving, throwing baseball, softball, football, whatever. I just think because when I was a teacher, phys ed teacher, all of my kids learned how to throw. All my students, we spent a long unit on that. And then same with kicking and hitting, swinging, like swinging a bat or a racket. And I think those are skills that because they carry over. Plus, we forget, I like being a father, that there's probably not a sport that I can't teach my kids. Even if I didn't play it, I could figure it out and I could teach them. And I think there's a lot of value to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, and to stay on swimming too, it's like I see people who in their adult age don't know how to swim, and there's a certain level of fear that they always live with.
Yeah.
Right? Like, don't get me near the pool. What happens if I'm on a boat? It can save their life, but it's also just, the quality of life that happens if you don't learn those skills early on. It's a tough thing to learn later too. It can be. So Ben has another question. He says, what are the benefits of speed, agility, quickness for endurance athletes specifically? And then also a second question would be for age group athletes.
Yeah. So when I was a track coach and I also was a cross country coach for a little while, I did a tremendous amount of speed and agility training with them. And I did it, number one, when you're dealing with younger athletes, you want to develop their variability of movement patterns. So that was important to me. So I always knew that. So our warm-ups and deep into our warm-up was very much multi-directional. The other thing is when we incur change of direction, so agility, cutting, or pure change of direction, we're getting a property that we don't typically get with most endurance sports, which is deceleration. Deceleration is one of those things that becomes a lifelong skill we don't want to lose, because stepping off a stair, coming downstairs, those are deceleration moments. When we teach athletes how to load, and you're loading the quads, how to load the posterior chain, how to do things of that, and create stiffness. Eric, I'm drawing a blank on his name. He did the myofascial anatomy trains, Thomas Myers.
Yes.
Yeah, Thomas Myers. So Thomas Myers talked about as we age, we lose that crimp. The crimp, how if you wrinkle your shirt up, get a crimp in it. Well, when we lose that elasticity and that power. And I'm a huge fan of that. So I think when we do various forms of agility and change of direction and quickness training with endurance athletes, we keep those qualities intact. And we can still build upon the endurance factors. And we become actually potentially better runners, if that's what it is, or bikers, because we've increased power. And anytime you have to do some kind of agility, now you're getting a power elastic components versus just enduring a gait cycle.
Yeah. So what about for age group athletes?
Yeah, age groups in terms of... 8
to 10, 10 to 12, those age group. Yeah, age group sports and athletes,
Yeah, definitely. I think the great thing about with the young kids is they naturally gravitate to agility and speed and quickness. That's a natural thing for them. So they're going to naturally get that just by playing and being involved with those patterns. I think, again, we go back to, I think we got to keep it as general as possible so that when they're doing their multidirectional speed and their change of direction, it becomes more task driven than me scripting their patterns, because I want them to develop a memory pattern, a memory sequence of patterns. And I want them to be able to react quickly. So if you and I are playing tag against each other, eventually I'm going to figure, all right, Eric likes to fake to his left and go to his right because he does it most of the time. Well, that's called recall, and that's interpretation of movement. And that's what's really important for the young kids to develop. So the younger my kids are, the less I instruct detail and the more I make them react and respond to a task and accomplish a task. But I'm very patient. I'm a very patient coach. I'm not the one that has to have it look perfect by week 1. I understand it comes over time. It's like riding a bike. Can't teach you to ride a bike. I can just tell you how to hold the handles and how to sit, but it comes with kinesthetic awareness. So that's the same thing with young kids. I think agility is critical, but let's let them solve some tasks and you'll see the agility develop.
Yeah. And you're not just teaching them agility, speed, but you're teaching them how to learn.
Yes.
And exactly. I think that's we talk about how education is changing. I was on a conversation this morning with Don Moxley, and we're talking about how the university models are just ripe for disruption, and how, because in the modern age we have as much information, like we were talking about earlier. We have as much information as we possibly want out there. There's very little. My wife learned how to ski through YouTube, right? And but the skills that we seem to be missing as a society is the critical thinking, the ability to learn, to be patient with the process, right? So, everyone wants everything right away. And I think that's a really important thing, because we haven't really, not yet, but human physiology really hasn't shifted. One of my favorite quotes from Jane Austrell is, it still takes 9 months to make a baby. And, that hasn't, we don't see that changing anytime at least in the next 5 years. But that's a really important skill set. And I think that's a really key point of what great coaches can do for youth is have them understand the process of learning.
That's right. And one of the things that I used to try to do with my younger athletes is allow them to teach their partner. Because when they have the acuteness to be able to see something in their partner, now they're grasping what learning is.
How cool.
Because that's the way we learn, is when we actually have to we task-driven experience. But when I actually have to tell you how to do something, now I can actually understand the process, because it shows up very quickly if I don't understand it, because I can't teach you. I can't tell you because I don't understand it.
Yeah. It's, it's interesting. And, the gyms that I started working out, and that the one I owned for a long time, and owner operator, was, as soon as somebody would come back from, a certification or a course or a learning experience, like, okay, now you got to teach all the coaches. Right. Yeah. And they're like, wow, okay, now I got to, do this. I got to apply this right away. And at first it's simple mimicry. You're just you're mimicking what you learned, but it's just, as it becomes part of you and you learn, that's the beauty of it all. That's why, coaching is so amazing.
That's right.
To learn and then apply and then make it kind of your own thing. Right.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I try to preach a lot when I talk to individuals just wanting advice on things, and because we're really big on reading, like we'll have guys that'll list, well, I read, this month I read 5 books or whatever. My advice is read 1 book 5 times. And then now what we can do, because that's going to do a couple things. There's always things you're going to miss. But number 2, what it's going to do is it's going to give you the opportunity to actually own the information. Yes, I can read a book a week, or quicker than that, depending on the size of the book and how busy I am. But I didn't own it because I didn't apply it. I don't have enough time if I'm reading that often, that quickly. And I'm not opposed to people doing that. My whole process with younger people is own something. You don't have to be just okay at 10 things. I'd rather you own 2 things really well. And then, in another 6 months, let's try to own 1 more thing. Now you own 3 things. And now you become known for something and you can impact somebody's life in that area. I always talk about myself. Like I said, I'm very comfortable with conditioning and strength and all these things, but I've created a life for my family and because I understand speed and I owned it. And that's what I did. And so I try to get them to understand, don't just try to keep up with the Joneses and read a book a week if you don't apply and own that information. That's really not giving you it's not giving you the information that you really want. It's just, you're just checking a box, and that's really not what learning is about. So yeah, I think you gotta own something.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. When I had Dan John on the second time for this podcast, a big topic of what went over is he said rereading is one of the most understated skills or habits that you can do, because you do miss a lot. And I took that to note, because I picked up 3 more books that I want to reread several times in 2019. And because they're so, you kind of you go through and you digest information so quickly. And you're right, everyone wants to keep up with, especially the entrepreneurial space. Well, I read 3 books a week. Oh, really? Well, I read 4. Well, who gives a crap, right? If it's not being applied, it's just another vanity metric. And it's a fascinating thing. So, all 3 of the gentlemen, Malcolm, Chris, and Ben, who all asked questions, they all wanted the same thing too, is, where do you see the industry going? 5 to 10 years, if people are getting into the fitness profession, how do we keep people skating to where the puck is going? What's your vision of where things are heading?
Yeah, that's a question I ask myself a lot too. I'm one of these people that I look at this. I look at our profession from where it came from and where it's gone, and then how much it's come back. Because like you were saying too, you got these little facilities now, little boxes that have very similar to what we did 50 years ago. So I think what's going to happen, and I think we're seeing it with a lot of some of the reality TV shows with fitness. The Titan, it was one of the Titan Games is a new one, I think, that's out, and you have all these other things. I think the influence of more inclusive type training of getting out there and moving and climbing and swimming and running and jumping, the triathlete type thing. I think a lot of that is going to continue to grow. And I believe so because, I'm 53 years old and I still feel like I'm 18 in respect. So I don't want to sit on we talked earlier about Nautilus. I don't want to sit on a selectorized machine and, hinge at my knee joint. I don't want to just be put through that cert. I want to throw medicine balls and I want to climb and I want to run and I want to do that stuff. I think our fitness, we're going to start to see, because we really have this big compartmentalized approach still. Okay. So we're going to really just train this little bit during this phase of training. And then once that's done, then we're going to move and we're going to improve this. I think we're going to start to see where we do more inclusive, where everything is happening together. Almost like I guess we went to the strength where we'd say conjugate, that type of approach. And I think we're going to see more of that happening. So when I do speed stuff with my athletes, I'll incorporate strength and power with it. Okay. It'll be right in the same rep. Okay. Or in the same set. We like complex type training. I think we're going to see more of that type of things. And I think you're going to see that being shown in more of that type of facility. Okay. Those type of facilities where you can run almost obstacle course based stuff, because I think the adult population is going to get bigger in fitness and the athletic performance is going to stall for a little bit. And the reason I say that is because of AAU and travel sports are dominating so much of the landscape. And I know back in the early 90s, it was no problem for me to run 60 kids a day through my training program easily. And it was just me. This wasn't with a bunch of staff. I was the only one. And then probably towards the early 2000s, many of these kids were getting an AAU. I couldn't get even close to that number. So it started to dive off, take a deep dive right off then. But the adult population is picking up of training. So that's why I see this overall combative type sport atmosphere. I think that's where we're going to see a lot. And I think facilities are going to have that model if they want to have the sports performance. You got to have something that's going to pull you along. And I think you got to have that adult component to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That makes me really happy. That makes me really excited, for where it goes, because, like we talked about earlier in this episode was, kind of the functional fitness movement leading to the ninja movement, leading to the Spartan movement, leading to all these, where it's actually, oh, wow, applied fitness is actually fun, and as I've been on this planet for 42 years, I've gone from a very strict training regiment to, I do a little bit of Olympic lifting, and I go and I seasonally do what I want to do. I ski in the winter, right? Mountain bike in the spring and summer. And my fitness isn't a chore anymore. It's just fun. And that's
so well said. That's exactly the way I am right now. There's times when I go out in my garage and I have everything you could need in the garage to work out. And sometimes I go out there and I don't decide to what I'm going to do until I finish my last warm up. And then I'm like, okay, this is what I feel like. Yeah. And then I go get it. And and I feel great about that because I can do anything I want and it keeps me healthy and I move well. So it's kind of fun. It's actually very stress relief.
It is. Yeah, it is. So Lee, if people want to get a piece of you, maybe some of the educational pieces you have out there, get in contact with you, where do you send them?
Yeah, they can, if they go to leetaft.com, they can reach us any way. Okay. Certainly at Lee Taft through, Twitter or, Facebook is everything is Lee Taft. So they can get me that way, Instagram or any of those. And I'm very, my email is lt@leetaft.com. They just reach out directly to me. I'm very accessible and I think that's the greatest part of this profession right now is I get to talk with other people who have a like-minded approach. So I think it's a lot of fun. So yeah, I appreciate you allowing me to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it was my pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. It was great insights. I had a lot of fun, and I think it's universally valuable for anybody in the fitness industry or not, some of the things we covered today. So,
well, thank you, Eric. That was great. You're doing great things. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Taft. Hey, fitness fans, don't leave yet. It's your host, Eric Malzone, and I have a quick favor to ask. Actually, 3 favors. So, number 1, if you're a fan of our show, I ask you to do something that takes under 3 minutes. Go to iTunes, please, and subscribe to our show. Please, please, please. It means so much to us. It's so important. And then give us a favorable review. We would really, really appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much it means and helps us out. So I know it takes 2 minutes of your day, and it means a lot to us. So please do that. Number 2, go to our YouTube channel, or Fitness Marketing Alliance, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel there. Number 3, if you like this episode or any of the episodes that we've released, share it on social. That's huge. That's a big deal for us. And we put a lot of work into these episodes, trying to give you great, actionable content for the fitness industry. So that would mean a lot. And that's it. So we have some big plans coming up for this show. I'll be talking about that in the next couple episodes. But thank you so much for listening. It means so much. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I love to hear from everybody. Eric, ERIC, @fitnessmarketingalliance.com.